Yeah, where to start? Well, back in 2016, signed with 300 Records, 300 Entertainment record label. We released "Don't You Cry for Me," first single. Had some nice bit of run of success on that song. So, the following year was planning putting out more music and touring. 2017, toured most of the year. Had a really nice run. 2018, at the end of 2017, found out my dad had cancer and found out my wife was pregnant around the same time. So flash forwarding a bit into, my her due date was in March 2018. So around that time, I obviously wasn't really on the road. I was here to be here for my wife. But around the same time, my dad was going through radiation therapy for his cancer after a surgery that he had. And he just started going downhill really fast. They would do one surgery and a treatment, and then it would come back literally a month or two later. They would do another surgery, and then they'd do chemo, and then that would come back again. And it was just, a downward spiral for him. So as my daughter was born, and he was just on a downward spiral. So ended up having to fly back and forth. I live in Los Angeles, and he lived in northern Minnesota, where I'm from. So I'd have to fly to Minneapolis and then drive 5 hours a lot of times to go see him. And it was just a lot of back and forth. He lived alone, so he didn't have, anybody really helping him out. My brother would do a lot. My brother lived in Minneapolis, so he would drive and help my dad as much as he could, but he couldn't do it all the time. So obviously I had to go step in sometimes too. And it's just a gruesome downward spiral that I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy, So, and as, my daughter turned 1, my dad passed away shortly after that. Luckily, he got to spend a little bit of time with her, not much, but we got her back there a few times. And it just took me out of the game, having those two things kind of happen. It was just like, hard to get back on my own feet after that, because I was trying to figure out how to be a father, and I was trying to figure out how to be a son. And it was just some profound changes,
I'm sorry that, first, I'm sorry to hear about your father, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. I can't imagine what that's like.
Everybody's going to go through something like that at some point in their lives. There's no escaping it. It's good. You're gonna have hard, trying times. Everybody's going to. So I appreciate the sentiment, but I never felt the need ever to have anybody feel sorry for anything. It just is what it is. We all got our own shit.
How were you handling the decline of your father's health alongside the birth of your daughter? Because I don't have any kids yet. I'm 26 years old. My father is luckily, he's still alive and hopefully will be for a long time. And most people dealing with one of those at the same time is incredibly difficult and trying, and one's a blessing and one is, of course, extremely tragic. How are you handling those two side by side?
Well, it was honestly, like, having my daughter be around at that time was a big saving grace for me, because I'd be there when I would go back to Minnesota and take care of my dad. A lot of times I would be there by myself, and I would bring my wife and daughter with me, but they wouldn't be at my dad's place. They would be at my mom's place, because that's home for me. Because my dad left us when I was very young. So that was a whole nother thing. It's like my dad had left. So, and we had, a pretty bumpy relationship, throughout my adolescent and adult life. So coming to terms with that, and then being a father myself, it was definitely something there to be explored. But anyway, taking care of my dad was one of the hardest and saddest, most depressing things I've ever done. So going home to my daughter, who would just be so happy to see me and smiling and want me to read to her and put her to bed and yada, yada. It just it made it bearable. It really made it like worth it in a way,
Mm-hmm.
So she was really like my saving grace for that whole experience, for sure. For
Mm-hmm.
sure. She would really lift me up because I didn't know how to go back and take care of him the next day. Because it was so, I'll spare you most of the details, but it was a really gruesome cancer that he had. He had skin cancer ultimately on his face. It kind of moved around. It started on his tongue. He was a smoker. Started on his tongue, moved to his lymph nodes. They cut out some parts of his tongue. They cut out his lymph nodes, ended up being skin cancer on his face. These big, open, gaping cancer wounds that literally look like somebody took a gun to his face and blew off part of his face. So,
Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, I could go into some serious detail, but I'll try to spare you. But anyway, it was very gruesome. So to be there by his side, taking care of him, was definitely the hardest thing I've ever done. So to have, I needed that like light in my life to go back to. Otherwise, it was just like, what the fuck is going on right now?
Yeah, I can't imagine trying to balance that emotionally and physically.
It was the only saving grace. Yeah, it was the only saving grace I had.
Yeah,
it was her.
Being able or having to take care of your father and then going home to see your daughter and entering that world and then having to go back and see your father the next day. It's like this push and pull. What I imagine is it's like two different worlds, and you may forget about one when you're in the other, and then you're like, oh, well, now I have to go back and do this again.
Yeah. And then the times where I wasn't, when I was working on music, there was times where I was in Los Angeles recording, working on some of the new material. And I just knew my dad was there suffering, all by himself. And it was just like, God, what am I doing here? It's like, I'm working on music. I'm like, my dad's here suffering by himself. It's like, I gotta get home. I have to get home. So it was just, it was hard to like work and focus on work during that time, as much as it was also helpful and healing too, because I could put some of that emotion into my work. But yeah, it was also tough. I knew I needed to be there for him.
Is there anything that made that situation more bearable for people, for example, that are listening to this podcast that may be dealing with a parent who's in a terrible condition right now that also has other responsibilities, like a kid that was just born or having to go to work every day? Was there something, a mindset or something that you did, anything that made your routine more bearable?
Man, I just, I guess having the kid was, like I said, was a big one. Was a big one. Although that had its own challenges too. Like when you become a father or a parent, you're literally sacrificing a lot of time. You're used to having so much time to yourself and so much time to work on yourself and so much time to work on your career or whatever. And all of a sudden, a lot of that time is just cut away, So going through that, trying to figure that out, it forces you to grow up, So you're in a lot of ways like dealing with your own like death of your own childhood in a way, because that's gone now and you're not going to get it back. But the beauty of it is you get to relive a lot of your childlike ways through your kid, So in some ways you get to be more childlike than you ever have been in a long time since you were a kid. And if you don't have kids, you're not going to get that same thing. You're not going to be able to experience, that childlike feeling without having a kid. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword, or two sides of the same coin. You know what I mean? In a way, you're giving up a lot of your own freedom, but in other ways, you get to relive so many amazing moments of being a child, and like reliving it through your child. So.
Yeah, it's hard for me to see right now because, like I said, I'm 26.
It'd be tough. It'd be tough to see. At 26, I was like, I'm not going to have kids.
That's where I'm at right now. I'm single, maybe on the verge of a relationship. We'll see. I don't know. But the fact of having kids, I think I'm just realizing how selfish I am. Like I've actually sitting down and thinking about how selfish I am with my time and how much I like doing things. And I make as much time as I can to hang out with my family and my friends. And I try to be there for them as much as possible. But then to add a kid into that equation, I'm trying to...
Well, rightfully so. You're still young. You're still a young man. So, rightfully so. You should be selfish with your time. This is the time in your life to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you're right.
It's when it's when you're older and you continue that. It's like, that's when it maybe becomes a little questionable.
How did you feel when you started to realize that maybe you were ready for a kid? Was there any switch or something that kind of flipped in your frame of mind, or when you started to think about it?
I don't know if I felt ready at all. It was just something that happened.
Or just ready to think about it, like ready to think about it. Was there anything that happened, or I don't know if there was like an event or something? It's hard to say.
Yeah, well, actually there was. Just before my wife at the time, or she wasn't my wife at the time, but I got her pregnant. We had gotten pregnant, and that was back in 2016. It was her first time she got pregnant. And we weren't married yet. So, and it was kind of an accident, obviously. So, and in that moment, I was like, holy shit, what's going to happen? Like, I was like 29, I think, at the time. And so that kind of blew my mind. But then, so we were like, I was like, do you want to, we were planning on and talking about getting married anyway. So, I was like, okay, well, do you want to get married before or after the baby? She's like, I want to get married before. So we kind of planned a shotgun wedding, like really fast, just a few months out. So as we were planning and working on that and planning on getting married, we ended up having a miscarriage. So that kind of threw us both for a total whirlwind, so we were thought, you think you're going to be a parent and your whole life's going to change and your brain starts changing. And then all of a sudden goes away,
I'm sorry. That's rough to have that taken away from you.
Well, it's all just what it is, it's all, I guess, meant to be in some way, but it definitely helped prepare me to, be a father. So, a year later, when it happened again, I was definitely a bit more prepared than I was the first time. It definitely brought me into that mindset a bit more, and had me thinking about it a lot more, for sure.
Lately, I've been thinking a lot about the moments that I do have left with my parents. And I think I've taken a lot of what my parents have done for granted, especially earlier in life when I was a teenager, because like what teenager isn't a piece of shit from time to time? But now I'm lucky enough to live about an hour away from my parents. I'm in Brooklyn and my parents are in Long Island, New York. But a lot of other people, they may only see their parents, 2 or 3 times a year when they fly in on the holidays or things like that. And then you can kind of extrapolate that out to see, if my parents live 20, 30 more years, I'm going to see them X number of times. And I try to be conscious of that and be more in the moment of it when I'm around my parents. And because I'm starting to realize like this is not going to be here
for sure
forever. Like, like my dad says some annoying shit at the dinner table and I want to get up and not talk to my dad. But then the day after he passes away, I would give anything to have one more annoying conversation with my dad again, like stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, also me living so far away from where I grew up is the same thing. It's like you have these long stretches of time where you don't see your family. So when you do see them, it's like kind of a time warp in a way where like you see how they aged, you really like see it. Because when you're with people every day, you don't notice the aging process quite as much. But when you see your family like maybe once a year or twice a year, like those gaps start to catch up and those time warps kind of start to catch up. And all of a sudden it's like, holy shit, where did this last fucking few years go?
Yeah. And so much of the conversation sometimes is superficial when you first get back together because everyone is always saying, what are you doing? How's your job? This stuff and that. And so the first hour or two, whatever, is taken up by stuff that doesn't even matter. So then when you think about the time that you're actually bonding with your family or relatives, it's even less.
Sure, I can see that.
For someone who, and I include myself in this, what would you say to someone who wants to make the most out of their time left with their parents, since you have the perspective of having lost your father, or maybe someone that wants to spend more time with their parents but is putting it off? What would you want to say to that person, knowing what you know now?
I don't know if I would really give any advice on that. It's just, I'm still trying to figure that out myself, with my mom, trying to figure out how we can try to spend more time together and make the most of the time we have. So I really don't know. Everybody's got so different relationships with their parents and their family. It's really hard to give advice on that, other than just, what you like, back to what you said, is that time is finite. So just try to keep that in mind. And when you're with, your loved ones, just try to be as present as you can, because it's a finite amount of time that you got.